Genghis Khan's story does not begin in a lavish court or an imposing palace, but in a vast steppe marked by a brutal survival scenario. He was born as Temujin at the end of the 12th century into a small nomadic tribe in the vast and unforgiving plains of Mongolia. His birth in 1162 was marked by an event that would soon become part of a legend. His father was poisoned by a rival tribe before Temujin was even 10 years old. This, however, was only the beginning of his long journey to become the greatest conqueror in history. Her father's death not only brought the emptiness of loss, but also a crisis of leadership and security for her family. The Mongols, like other nomadic tribes, lived in a world where loyalty and power were fiercely contested, and the small family groups, known as clans, were constantly at war over territory and resources. For Temujin, that meant living under constant pressure, being forced to mature faster than any child his age. His first great test of endurance came shortly after his father's death, when his family was betrayed and abandoned by other members of his tribe. Trying to survive, they were rejected and forced to live in extreme conditions. Temujin and his siblings were still children, but the struggle for survival in the icy and treacherous fields shaped something inside Temujin. With each challenge, with each day of struggle, he began to build not only a strong character, but an indomitable mentality. As a young man, Temujin captured the attention of the other tribal leaders, not by his physical strength, but by his impressive cunning. He was not only interested in conquering land or riches, but in changing the very structure of the tribes. Instead of temporary, fragile alliances, he sought something more lasting, a union that was based on the strength of his own ideas. It was more than just diplomacy or politics. It was a new way of looking at power and control. In 1186, when Temujin was already a teenager, he was given a first major opportunity to test his potential as a leader. He was proclaimed Khan, or leader, of a tribe, but this was not simple or unopposed. It was a name that carried with it the weight of a long tradition of war and respect. And for a young man with almost no resources and no strong allies, this was a chance that required more than military skill. It required the power of strategic vision. It was at this stage that he began to define what the Mongol Empire would be. Genghis Khan was not limited to the old ways of governing that his tribes followed. He wanted to turn the scattered tribes, often at war with each other, into a single, unbeatable machine. He needed a united army, one that would not be divided by internal disputes and rivalries. The old tribal system was eroding the stability of the lands he wished to conquer. But to do so, Temujin not only needed to win tribes, but also hearts and minds. He understood that the key to unity lay not in brute domination, but in creating a code of laws that would be accepted by all. He instituted the yasa, a set of rules and norms that, while rigid, provided a sense of justice for his followers. The idea was simple. Loyalty to the tribe and the leader was absolute, and any transgression would be punished severely. But what really set Yasser apart was the fact that he was fair and not favorable to the few. He established a network of rewards and punishments based on merit, loyalty, and, of course, courage. However, Temujin's first big step would not be a battle against a great nation or empire, but a fight against his own fears and internal limitations. He would begin to build the empire not through a battle, but by the strength of his spirit. The way he would use the psychology of war, the tricks and military maneuvers, would make Temujin's name something to be feared and respected by the whole world. As the young leader matured, he began to move away from the vulnerable person he once was. His determination to conquer, unite, and transform Mongolia's political and military landscape was beginning to take shape. He gathered loyal followers who, in many cases, were the same men who had previously been at war with him. But He did not depend on alliances forged by marriage or inheritance. He believed in the strength of merit, and those who excelled were rewarded. In every action, in every move, the mind of a military genius and an innate conqueror was formed. He knew that the only way to achieve something great was to ignore what others saw as impossible. He was no longer Temujin, the orphan boy of the steppe. It was beginning to become something much bigger. With each new challenge, he grew closer to the legendary figure we know as Genghis Khan. As the young Temujin progressed on his journey of consolidating power, he faced two main obstacles: loyalty and resistance. It was not enough just to win battles. He needed to win the hearts of every tribe that came his way, turning former enemies into faithful allies. It was this combination of military skill, political strategy, and personal charisma that began to forge the legend of Genghis Khan. By 1190, Temujin had already gathered a small group of loyal followers. The first major test of his leadership would be a battle against the Taichi-Ud tribe, who had been responsible for his father's death and betrayal of his family. But this battle would not be like the previous ones, in which the disputes between tribes were simple wars of plunder and conquest. Temujin knew that he needed to use more than just physical strength. He was beginning to understand the importance of the psychology of war and strategic manipulation. In his campaign against the Taichi-Ud, Temujin not only used overwhelming military force, but also spread disinformation and paranoia among his enemies. He ordered his men to infiltrate enemy lines, spreading rumors of treachery among the tribe's own leaders. This psychological method, although simple, was absolutely effective. When the battle finally took place, the Taichi-Ud were divided, confused, and unable to react properly to the invasion. After the victory, Temujin not only exterminated the enemies, but made sure to capture and incorporate many of the defeated warriors into his own army, showing that his conquest was not only military, but also ideological. He was beginning to create a motley army where loyalty was more important than tribal origin. It was the first demonstration of his innovative system of recruiting, rewarding, and punishing his soldiers according to merit. This achievement also solidified what would become the basis of his policy of unification, the idea that in order to ensure the survival and prosperity of all, the tribes should be united into a single nation. Unlike other leaders who followed the old traditions, which favored marriage alliances or endless struggles between tribes, Temujin believed that true strength came from uniting everyone under a common banner. He set to work to create a code of universal laws, something that would transcend tribal rivalries and establish a more just and efficient social order. But it wasn't just the internal struggle he had to face. Temujin was becoming such a powerful leader that other Khans and tribal chiefs began to see him as a threat. In 1201, the greatest resistance to his power came from Togrul, the Khan of the Karaite tribe, who had initially been an ally of Temujin. Togrul felt threatened by Temujin's growing popularity and turned against him, aligning himself with other nomadic leaders. This resulted in Temujin's first major coalition of enemies, one of the defining moments in his rise. The battle against Togrul and his allies would be the greatest trial by fire for Temujin up to that point. What he demonstrated was an impressive ability to turn disadvantages into victories. Despite the uneven numerical forces, Temujin was able to split the enemy coalition and attack in a surgical manner, using distraction tactics and rapid attacks. His ability to think strategically and his ability to adjust his approach to each new challenge cemented his position as the region's most formidable leader. After the victory, Temujin made a radical decision. Instead of following the traditional path of booty and looting, he acted unexpectedly, offering forgiveness to many of his defeated enemies. He didn't just want to win them over, he wanted to turn them into allies. Those who surrendered to him were integrated into his empire. This policy not only ensured that his power base expanded, but it also attracted many followers who were disillusioned with the constant tribal wars and who saw in Temujin a figure who could offer stability and prosperity. In 1203, after a series of victories and upheavals, Temujin finally managed to convince most of the Mongol tribes to unite under his leadership. It was at this pivotal moment that he styled himself Genghis Khan, the Universal Khan, establishing his authority over the vast steppes of Mongolia. That name was not just a title. It symbolized the union of a people under a single leader, a single law, and a single goal, the construction of an unbeatable empire. The ceremony of his ascension was modest, but the impact was immediate. From that moment on, Genghis Khan would no longer be a tribal leader, but the sovereign of all Mongol tribes. He ruled with an iron fist, but also with strategic wisdom. Genghis Khan knew that the greatest threat to his empire came not from external forces, but from internal divisions. He now faced the greatest challenge of all, creating an administrative structure that would ensure the loyalty of his followers while expanding his influence beyond Mongolia's borders. What made Genghis Khan a truly unique figure in history was his vision of an empire where cultural and tribal differences were not a barrier, but an advantage. He understood that the true power of his empire would come from diversity, and that each conquered people would have something to offer. His policy of religious tolerance and integration of diverse cultures into his empire would be one of the pillars that would sustain the vast Mongol Empire for decades to come. This phase of Mongolian unification was not only a military victory, it was a social and cultural transformation. Genghis Khan was shaping the future of Central Asia and eventually the world. He would not only become the greatest conqueror in history, but also the archetype of the ruthless leader who turned challenges into opportunities and built empires based on his vision and determination. With Mongolia unified under his leadership, Genghis Khan knew that the next step was to expand. He was no longer just the leader of a nomadic people. He had a much bigger vision. His goal now was to create an empire that transcended the borders of his homeland, conquering and integrating vast and diverse lands. He wanted more than riches or fame. His desire was to build an empire that would be an example of strength, efficiency, and unity. Genghis Khan's first major military campaign beyond Mongolia's borders was against the Jurchens of the Jin dynasty, who ruled northern China. The Jin were a significant military power, and their forces were well prepared to repel any invaders. But Genghis Khan had a different strategy, based on patience, adaptability, and a deep understanding of his enemies. The first thing Genghis did was to study the structure of the Jin Empire and identify its weaknesses. He knew that in order to defeat such a well-established empire, he would need to use a unique approach. Rather than simply engaging the Jin in direct battle, Genghis Khan adopted an innovative tactic, something that would become a hallmark of his campaigns: psychological warfare and the use of espionage. Fearing retaliation from the Jin, Genghis Khan sent spies to sow discord among the dynasty's generals. He spread rumors of internal betrayals and weaknesses in the enemy's ranks, which caused the Jin commanders to begin to distrust each other. This psychological warfare, coupled with swift and stealthy military maneuvers, was one of the first demonstrations of his strategic skill. In 1211, after weeks of raids and rapid raids, Genghis Khan began his open offensive against the Jin. He attacked with full force, using his agile and highly trained army to attack on multiple fronts. His cavalry, the backbone of the Mongol Empire, was instrumental in this conquest. Genghis Khan's troops, adept at rapid movement and sudden attacks, destabilized the Jin defenses, quickly conquering territory and forcing the dynasty to retreat. Genghis' army was not only swift, he was also ruthless. After defeating the Jin forces in several decisive battles, Genghis Khan pursued a strategy that was already proving effective: to destroy the enemy forces completely and without mercy. Civilians, as he had shown in other campaigns, were not spared, which generated a reputation for terror among those who opposed him. But Genghis Khan didn't just conquer, he transformed. One of the reasons for his fame as a conqueror was not only his ability to win battles, but his approach to ruling the conquered territories. He did not limit himself to plundering and destroying. He reorganized social and administrative structures, using the best available labor, regardless of origin. The defeated populations were not simply subjugated, but absorbed into the Mongol Empire, with the best resources and talents being utilized for the benefit of all. The Jurchens, unable to resist Genghis' force, capitulated in 1215, and Beijing, the capital of the Jin, was taken. This victory was crucial, not only in strategic and military terms, but also symbolically. It was the first major city of the Chinese Empire to fall to the Mongols, and the idea that a nomadic, seemingly smaller force could conquer a consolidated, sophisticated empire sent a strong signal to the world. After the fall of Beijing, the Jin dynasty collapsed, and Genghis Khan consolidated his position in northern China. But his vision was not limited to that territory alone. He knew that to ensure the perpetuation of the empire, he needed to go further. He turned to the Khwarezmian Empire, which was located in the Central Asian region, and which would soon become the next major target of his expansion. The Khwarezmians, led by Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad, were not prepared for the storm that was about to fall upon them. Unlike the Jin, the Khwarezmians underestimated Genghis Khan, making a fatal mistake. In 1218, when Genghis sent emissaries to negotiate a trade settlement, the Shah made a disastrous choice. He killed the messengers and executed other Mongol diplomats. This act of treason would be the trigger for one of the most brutal campaigns in all of military history. In response, Genghis Khan not only marched against the Khwarezmian Empire, he destroyed entire cities, killing hundreds of thousands of people. Shah himself, now aware of the magnitude of his failure, tried to flee, but Genghis Khan's fury seemed unstoppable. Every city that refused to surrender was completely destroyed, and the survivors were often forced to join the Mongol army on pain of death. The campaign against the Khwarezmians was devastating. Genghis Khan once again demonstrated his strategy of using brute force, but also psychological terror. The cities he conquered were so completely disintegrated that they became examples to other powers that thought of challenging the Mongol force. This act of mass destruction, while cruel, further cemented Genghis Khan's empire. He had not only defeated an empire, he had shown the world the strength of his military power, the ruthlessness of his decisions, and the effectiveness of his tactics. The first part of Genghis Khan's great conquest outside Mongolia was already complete, but he knew that the journey was just beginning. The empire he was creating was vast, and his influence would extend over entire continents, changing the course of history forever. As Genghis Khan expanded his empire, the true grandeur of his vision became more and more evident. He was not just a conqueror, he was also a master strategist, not only on the battlefield, but in the administration of an empire that stretched from parts of China to Eastern Europe. Unlike many conquistadors who limited themselves to ruling by absolute power, Genghis Khan understood that the true strength of an empire did not come only from its military victories, but from the ability to integrate it in a cohesive and functional way. One of the first innovations that Genghis Khan implemented was the creation of a communication network unprecedented for the time. He established a system called YAM, a network of mounted post offices with checkpoints scattered throughout the empire. The messengers, known as Yamchi, traveled long distances on horseback, ensuring that communication between the rulers of different regions was efficient and fast. This network not only enabled the transmission of crucial orders and information, but was also vital to maintaining control over the vast territories he had conquered. In addition, Genghis Khan understood that the mobility and speed of his army depended on an efficient logistical system. He implemented a highly organized supply system, which ensured that his troops were always well supplied and ready for action. The Mongols did not rely solely on plunder to sustain their army. He created an infrastructure that allowed his forces to move quickly over vast distances without losing effectiveness. Supply caravans were protected by auxiliary armies, and the logistics of their campaigns was one of the reasons for the success of their invasions into distant lands. Another essential point of the Mongol Empire was its unique approach to multiculturalism. Unlike many contemporary empires, Genghis Khan allowed for a wide religious and cultural diversity within his empire. He had a policy of religious tolerance. Despite being a man of faith in a single god, he did not impose his beliefs on the peoples. He conquered. Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, and other religious groups were free to practice their religions without persecution. Genghis Khan knew that in order to keep the peace in such a vast and diverse empire, he would need to promote coexistence between different cultures rather than pursuing religious or cultural uniformity. Regarding administration, Genghis Khan stood out by promoting meritocracy. Unlike many ancient empires, where positions of power were distributed based on nobility or lineage, Genghis Khan chose his generals and officers based on their performance and loyalty. Those who proved to be loyal and capable were rewarded, no matter their background. This allowed him to build a highly skilled army, made up not only of Mongols, but also slaves, prisoners of war, and even former enemies who became allies. This approach brought a diversity of skills to his empire, and the performance of his officers was the main criterion for his promotion. But meritocracy was not limited to the army. He applied the same principle in the administration of the empire. The rulers of the various conquered regions were evaluated on the basis of their ability to govern effectively, and those who failed in their tasks were replaced without hesitation. In his empire, practical skills were valued more than social status or family lineage. Another key aspect of Mongol administration was the system of taxes and tribute. Genghis Khan did not trust a large and inefficient bureaucracy like many empires of the time. Instead, he created a system of simple, straightforward taxes, which were collected fairly and which could be managed efficiently by his officials. This system allowed the empire to generate great wealth without burdening the peasants or merchants, and the wealth generated was often reinvested in military growth or the construction of infrastructure. Genghis Khan also knew how to take advantage of the natural resources of his empire in an intelligent way. During his conquests, he ordered the construction of cities that would become vital commercial and cultural centers for the empire. He encouraged trade between the various regions of his empire, creating a steady flow of goods, ideas, and technologies. Between East and West, his Silk Road network, a network of trade routes linking China to the Islamic world and Europe, was one of the greatest achievements of his administration. In addition, by promoting trade, he helped create an environment where cultures met and influenced each other. Security on the borders of the empire was another priority for Genghis Khan. He created a complex defense system with forts and garrisons scattered throughout Central Asia. The Mongol army not only advanced to conquer, but also effectively defended the territories already conquered. He used the tactic of intimidation to keep enemies at bay, making their territories safer and ensuring that trade routes remained open. However, perhaps Genghis Khan's greatest innovation was the way he dealt with revolts within his empire. Unlike many rulers who reacted with brutal punishments and violent reprisals, Genghis Khan sought to understand the causes of dissatisfaction and, when possible, used diplomacy to resolve tensions. He was a pragmatic leader who knew that to keep the empire running, it would be necessary to act wisely and not just brute force. This combination of military strength, administrative innovation, and cultural acumen is what has made Genghis Khan one of the greatest leaders of all time. His empire stretched impressively, but more importantly, he knew how to keep this empire stable and functional. In doing so, he created a legacy that would not only be remembered for his military achievements, but also for his unique ability to rule efficiently and intelligently. As the Mongol Empire expanded and consolidated, Genghis Khan began to be recognized, not only as a conqueror, but as the founder of an empire that would survive for centuries and that would influence the history of the world forever. As the Mongol Empire expanded and consolidated under Genghis Khan, he approached the final phase of his life. The vision he had created, one of a vast and diverse empire, was almost complete. However, like every great leader, Genghis Khan knew that his work would not be eternal without the guarantee that his sons and successors could continue what he had started. Genghis Khan had many sons, and among them, the most prominent were Jebey, Chagatai, Ogedei, and Kublai. Genghis's ability to choose and trust his sons and loyal generals was crucial to the future of the empire. However, the great leader knew that the empire needed a ruler capable of maintaining the unity and strength it had gained, for he understood that without a strong leader, the empire could easily fragment. Before his death in 1227, Genghis Khan made a point of dividing the empire so that his sons could rule with relative autonomy, but always under the principle of unity that he had established. Genghis Khan did not wish for the empire to be conquered again. Because of this, he created a network of loyalties, alliances, and strategic governance that ensured that his vision continued after his departure. After his death, the succession of power was not immediate, but over time, the empire was divided among his sons and grandsons, with Ogedei Khan, his third son, being chosen as the next great Khan of the empire. Ogedei, while not as militarily aggressive as his father, was a shrewd ruler who knew how to manage the vast territories that had been conquered. Under Ogedei's reign, the Mongol Empire reached a new phase of expansion and stability. He consolidated power in Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and began new campaigns of conquest, mainly in the Italian peninsula and North Africa. Ogedei maintained Genghis Khan's policy of respecting and incorporating different cultures and religions, and continued to promote the economy through trade and diplomacy. However, the Mongol Empire also faced internal challenges. The vast empire, composed of different peoples and cultures, required centralized and effective administration, and while some of his sons and grandsons were skilled administrators, others proved less competent. The lack of unity and the growing ambition of local rulers began to generate tensions. The fragmentation of territories and the struggle for power would eventually lead to the gradual decline of the empire. Even with these challenges, the impact of Genghis Khan and his empire would endure for centuries. Its empire not only united vast areas of Asia, but also connected different parts of the world through the Silk Road, becoming the main facilitator of trade between East and West. Cultural exchange, technology transfer, and the flow of ideas between Chinese, Islamic, European, and Indian civilizations were directly driven by the Pax Mongolica. the period of relative peace and stability provided by the presence of a centralized empire despite constant military expansions. In addition, Genghis Khan's administrative reforms, such as meritocracy, religious tolerance, and the use of espionage and advanced communication, profoundly influenced the empires that emerged after the decline of the Mongol Empire. The legacy of its governance was adopted by other powers, and its techniques of warfare and administration were studied by generations of leaders and strategists. A vital aspect of Genghis Khan's legacy was the creation of a globally interconnected empire. Trade flourished, new routes were opened, and Mongol influence extended as far west as the West. The Yuan dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis, brought China into the bosom of the Mongol Empire, and it was under his leadership that the Mongols reached the zenith of imperial administration. Kublai Khan not only strengthened the Mongol presence in Asia, but also challenged the traditional Chinese political and cultural structure, bringing new knowledge and institutions to the Chinese Empire. Over time, as the empire fragmented, the impact of the Mongol Empire and Genghis Khan was never fully erased. Genghis's descendants continued to rule over a vast area of territories in Asia and the Middle East. Timur, or Tamerlane, a 14th century military leader, would be one of the successors who would seek to emulate Genghis Khan's example, reunifying the Mongol lands and even expanding the empire in new directions. The cultural impact of Genghis Khan and his empire is also indisputable. The cultural exchange he facilitated between East and West had a profound effect on the European Renaissance, with the accounts of explorers such as Marco Polo, who traveled through the Mongol lands and brought reports about the great empire back to Europe. This not only inspired new trade routes, but also sparked an increase in the exchange of ideas and technologies between civilizations. Today, Genghis Khan is a figure who continues to be revered and studied. In his native Mongolia, he is celebrated as a national hero, a symbol of unity, strength, and resilience. His image, which once represented a ruthless conqueror, has evolved over the centuries to represent the transformation of a nomadic people into one of the most powerful civilizations in history. And while many of the empires that emerged after Genghis Khan's death no longer exist, his legacy as a military leader, administrator, and visionary endures. He was not only a conqueror, he was a master of strategy, a unifier of peoples, and arguably one of the greatest leaders in world history. The Mongol Empire he founded, though fragmented, stands as one of the greatest examples of how the strength of a leader, combined with strategic intelligence and a global vision, can transform the world. Genghis Khan, the man who started out as a young nomad with nothing, became the leader of an empire that would shape the future of humanity in ways that still reverberate to this day. Genghis Khan's conquests forever changed the course of history, but the true story of his empire is still being discovered. If you enjoyed learning more about this legendary conqueror, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating stories of past protagonists who shaped the world as we know it. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about Genghis Khan's impact on history? Do you agree that your approach to empire is still a reference to this day? We want to hear from you, and remember, if you turn on notifications, you'll be the first to know when the next big protagonist of the story arrives here on our channel. Until next time, and may the story continue to inspire us.